Hello and welcome to Grinding Meaning number 42, Tactical Famine and Secular Religions. I think I should hit the secular religion thing first, but before that, I would like to confirm that my stream is actually... There we go! And it'd be nice to confirm that I also have sound. I do not hear sound. Hello and welcome. And that is me. Okay. We are good. Oddly enough, the definition of religion is a secular definition. And it seems a little arbitrary and self-benefiting to the secular. I think it's better to look at religion as two things. One is how we process meaning and value, mostly meaning. Like we are wired to apply moral, we make moral judgments, and the moral side of it is largely religiously processed. I don't like that explanation. You shouldn't either. It's basically a way we negotiate with reality when it comes to meaning. So people will always be, it's why it's used as, people will say somebody does something religiously. It's kind of like we understand that there is a level of dedication beyond reason, and it's something people will do regardless of whether or not it contains a God belief. And the idea that a belief in the supernatural is required for something to be a religion, it doesn't really make sense, because the important qualities, in my opinion, that make something a religion don't necessarily have to relate to the supernatural. I think it's why people would say they're spiritual, which means that they have a belief in, a higher order to things than is represented by straight up physics and determinism. Also, collectively in a society, something will always, think of it as positions occupied by groups. And there are many of these positions, and the positions always exist in every culture. What changes is what occupies those positions. Give me a moment to check something. Cool. So there will always be something occupying the religious slot in a culture. And historically, it's always been what would be classically defined as a religion. But other things will occupy that slot. Historically, it could be an individual, or it could be a belief system that functions as a religion, but since it's lacking an overt supernatural aspect, the oddly convenient definition would say, well, that's not a religion. But the important part of what makes a religion isn't the supernatural part. It's the, you could say, all-encompassing moral... This is what... okay, one good way to identify a secular belief system as a religion is, well, is it hostile to the dominant religion? Because in order to take the position it wants to take, it will need to displace what's currently in that. And if you've looked at the thumbnail with Mao and Stalin and the Kim dynasty, all movements that were extremely hostile to religion. You could also say the atheist skeptical movement was extremely hostile to religion and had this idea that people are inherently good and it takes religion to make a good person do a bad thing, which I'm going to admit there was a time that sounded reasonable, but there's an unstated premise nested within that people are inherently good and that the religion is what makes people bad, rather than people, on average, not being particularly good. We need a culture to, civilize us, and short of, a culture, a belief system, shared belief system that can do that, we generally don't treat each other very well. It's this delusional idea of something like the noble savage, that there is a base state of human that is good. And if you could just remove all the bad influences, people would revert to this naturally good state. And it's delusional to think that. You need a shared belief system that has your fellow man's well-being at heart, and not just in words, because you'll see humanism will claim to be about good things, but then you watch the behavior of those that don the label, and there are definitely good people among them, but the people that rise to power in most situations like this are not the people that you'd really want having the power. I should just mention the thing on screen here. I put together a diagram that I think captures essentially the layers. Overall, the diagram is just to kind of capture the different layers of motivation, the different types of people, and the different, it's not just the individual people, but within individuals, what is driving the movement. And with a lot of movements, you will have noble aspirations, that will often require sacrifices, and they will also often have unintended consequences. You'll notice it says the word surface. But with I should say, critics of communism are often very generous. And it's for a very, very understandable reason. Nobody wants to go to the mental place of considering something evil. So nobody really wants to go there. And it's much more comfortable to think that they're just incompetent. And sort of we're wandering over into the tactical famine area, and on the thumbnail you'll see people who used famine against their own people very effectively. And we'd much rather believe that they were just incompetent at running a country. You don't really want to consider that they used the famine to control their population. And it's not something that can be denied in North Korea, especially with, what you hear from people that actually escape from there. I'm going to go back to this diagram. And I tentatively titled this The Nested Drives of a Toxic Movement. But this diagram, if you move the labels around, could also be used to describe positive movements. So, which you saw before, noble aspirations, required sacrifices, and unintended consequences. We look at, say, the Soviet Union model. It was, hey, we're going to be bringing this great thing around, and it's gonna be amazing, and we're going to be the best because of it. And there's the noble aspirations. But if you look down at the bottom of the reality side, uh, it's setting unrealistic or delusional goals. And then when you get to the required sacrifices, well, we're gonna have some food shortages, and some of your freedoms are going to need to be curtailed, and there's going to be some stuff that it's going to be rough for a little while, but trust me, it's going to get better. But these things are typically just a consolidation of power, as you see on the reality side. And the part that people will have a lot of difficulty accepting is the unintended consequences from the unrealistic and delusional goals can, for part of the movement, be the desired results. In the case, and this is a big difference between Stalin and Mao. I been through many, many books on the communist revolutions over there, and it's my opinion that Mao was what I would call a complete sociopath, in that he was unable, he was unable to ascertain or experience anything that you would call a moral dimension. He was playing a game of civilization, and everyone and everything were just things. You could say he was biologically solipsistic, and he would make whatever moves would bring him more power. And power is a safety thing. And it's something he learned when he was young, is if someone has more power than you could end up in a very bad place and unable to do anything about it. So his desire for power was basically, sounds weird, self-preservation. And with Mao, he did on a couple of occasions toy with like reforms that we would consider like positive directions, but they didn't yield the results he was looking for. And, actually eroded at, offering some freedoms, eroded at his power. So that got in the way of his overall goal. So he obviously didn't go that direction. The difference with Stalin is he was not unable, well, he was able to see moral dimensions. And he was a very angry, bitter, self-hating person. And in the mechanic I've described in other streams, people who have a great self-loathing have this mechanism where they can essentially cast their sin onto other people and then punish them. And that was much of what you would have called incompetence, especially, basically allowing Germany to just run roughshod over all these defenses that he built up that were so poorly set up that there could have only been one outcome from it. And then the people were supposed to die, and everyone who he sent in to fight was supposed to die for his sins. I'm getting a little bit off here. And then the worst part, of course, is any veterans that came back were immediately snatched up and gulagged because, well, they were supposed to die. He had this need to make others suffer and die. So in the diagram, Stalin was operating in the orange, whereas Mao did not have this need to make people suffer. He just didn't care if they did. Everyone was just a commodity. He would talk about the population of his population, the size of his population as just this resource to be used however he felt. Now the famine was sometimes it was both to control the people, but it was also to just garner whatever resources he could from the population to serve his goals. Whereas Stalin was motivated in the orange. He wanted people to suffer. This is the unintended consequences that were actually desired results. Now, if you were to take this diagram and apply it to an actual noble movement trying to make positive change in a society, let's say the civil rights movement. On the top, I should describe the rest of this. Obviously on the left, it describes the naive, cynical, and malevolent. I suppose that's fairly obvious, but in the, let's say, the communist toxic movements, the people, you have the naive people who believe the noble aspirations, they have no power, and they don't seem to understand that the goals are unrealistic or delusional. And in the green ring, there are more the cynical actors. They are happy, even though they know it's kind of bullshit. They will push the need for the required sacrifices, and these are the people who have some power. And they do understand that, this is about, consolidation of power. And then obviously in the orange ring, you is not usually occupied by very many people. And I'm doing the, basically the Stalin-Lenin model at the moment. But when you look at the Mao model, you would have to switch the some power and power. Now, he would have malevolent individuals underneath him because they were useful in his goals, but he would often remove these people once they weren't useful anymore. So like that would be like one switch between like Mao and Stalin. But let's say you were to apply this to like the civil rights movement, the noble aspirations would stay the same. Required sacrifices would be an individual thing, not something you would acquire of other people. And because the goals are not unrealistic or delusional, the people aren't naive. A large part, probably most of the population, did support a move towards equality for all races during the civil rights movement. There's this thing that activists will do, and they will jump in front of a parade and pretend they're leading it. Like, we tend to ascribe the change to the activists involved. And it's not that they don't play a part, it's just they could not have done the thing they were doing if they did not have the wide support. Now, you'll look at, people in power trying to stop it, but the people in power were not representative of the population at that point, or the movement would not have succeeded. To go over you would have to switch the no power to the power on the right there in a civil rights movement. Now, you would still have some power in the more cynical actors, the opportunists, I don't want to name names, but there were people who saw this thing and saw it as a chance to improve their individual status in the civil rights movement. And also in the civil rights movement, you had malevolent individuals who were within the movement, but they were so fringe that they did not have any significant amount of power in the movement. So this diagram can be easily retooled to describe any movement. This just happens to be the setup for... I need a better title. I titled this The Nested Drives of a Toxic Movement, but I need something better than that. But I will work on that another time. If you're waiting for me to describe what's happening currently with the bizarre interest in undermining food production in the Western world, I tend to try to stay away from current events. I did post a short about about the I forget how I phrased it, but basically this global movement to generate a food shortage. And it's one of those things where all the choices that would need to be made to cause a particular thing to occur seem to be getting made, while the people pushing this act as if they care about noble aspirations. And, we could apply this with, actually, you probably don't have to change anything to apply this to the global environmental. It's not really environmental. It's the global population reduction movement, I guess you could call it. And on the top, in the noble aspirations, we need a more sustainable future. We need to reduce, well, it was greenhouse emissions, but now it seems like they have a problem with nitrogen, which is really odd because that's like, 80% of what you're breathing right now. But this idea that they need to save the world from people. But, in the bottom, to go down to reality, cutting the world's population in half or a quarter, or by some of the more less subtle individuals in the movement, by even more than that. That is an unrealistic goal, and you would have to be a supervillain. Like, Thanos only wanted half. Like, this is a lot more than that. But there are going to be required sacrifices, which is we have to stop using non-organic fertilizer, which just kind of out of the blue, like the advanced farming practices is what allowed the population to get where it is. So they seem to be driven to attack that. But what it's actually about is a consolidation of power. You have independent food producers they are in the way of progress. But there are going to be unintended consequences, like in Sri Lanka. But no reasonable person would have pushed them. Now, there's a lot going on there, and a lot of incompetent management, there's a lot more going on there than just, you could say global elites pressuring them into banning non-organic fertilizer. But with what happened, which is just unbelievable, you should look it up, with what happened there, being presented as unintended consequences is kind of insane. This could have only been the desired result and a product of malevolence. You could also apply this to gender movements, and you really wouldn't have to change much or anything. It's like you go on the outside and you have the naive people that just, hey, just let people be whatever they want and accept them as whatever they claim to be. And, that's the nice thing to do. But it's unrealistic because we have categories for a reason. Categories make things fair. And yeah, I don't think I'm going to go far into this. I've already gone too far into current events and politics, which I typically try to avoid. But I recommend this as a way of looking at any movement and seeing what parts you have to modify and what ring has the power. Yeah, what ring has the power in the movement is really how you can tell what its end result is going to be. Like I was saying, with the civil rights movement, since the power rested in the outside And it wasn't an unrealistic goal, and which means the people weren't naive and they actually had power. This is why it worked. Even if there were people in the inner rings that were cynical and malevolent, those people did not control the movement. With certain toxic movements at work today, that power is in the green or the orange or the red. Now, I had labeled the red as evil. And you say, well, isn't a malevolent person that wants people to suffer and even die, isn't that evil? Well, it depends on your experience. Evil is an experience. And depending on how naive you might be, just someone exploiting you in a cynical way will feel evil. But if you have a better idea of how the world works, not necessarily that you are cynical, but you're just not naive, the cynical actors don't necessarily seem evil to you, but the malevolent people might still be. And if you're even less naive about the world, and you know that a lot of what happens is driven by malevolent individuals, the malevolence doesn't seem evil or as evil. The center dot, the red, is reserved for, in my mind, something I would call the destruction of potential. And when very broken people, very angry at the world, self-hating, and just want to tear it all down and destroy everything. Basically, your supervillain who has decided that humanity has just become too sick to go on. That the only moral thing is to just end all human life on the planet. That this all needs to come to an end because we are just so bad. Or that and they will just try to do the most damage they possibly can. The destruction of potential, I think a good way to describe it is in a morally dubious population, such as a prison. People who harm children, let's say, are recognized as a special kind of bad, even among people who rob and cheat and steal, and even people who kill other people are not considered to be as bad as those who hurt children. It's just something understood by even, the most morally dubious of the population. They still understand. And that's because a child has his whole life ahead of him. And you have no idea what this person could bring to the world, what they could become. And everyone understands that if a bad thing happens to a very old person, it sucks, it makes you sad. But if that same exact thing happens to a child, it's so much worse. And we all understand this. And I think it's because there's this destruction of potential aspect. And I reserve the red circle for those that are drawn to the destruction of potential. I'm the Expert Layman. This has been Grinding Meaning number 42, Tactical Famine and Secular Religions. You all have a great day.